We just saw a clip about your relationship with Bob Dylan. Can you tell us a little more about that? And by the way, you do such a, in one of the clips from the movie, you do an impersonation of him singing a song, which I thought was.
You know, I have a new reaction now when people say, "What about Bob Dylan?" It is such an honor to have been a part of his life.
The friendship of Bob, his songs.
Joan Baez and Bob Dylan were not just two icons of folk music. They were the soul of an entire generation. When they stood side by side, it was as if the world paused to listen. Behind the timeless melodies and glowing stage lights, however, was a love story that forever changed them both. They loved each other deeply, inspired one another, and ultimately hurt each other in ways no one could have predicted. For years, Joan Baez kept quiet about what truly happened between them. Now, she finally opens up, not just about love, but about betrayal, heartbreak, and the kind of connection that, though fractured, remains eternal through music. Before the tears and the songs of regret, there were two young dreamers swept up in the most dazzling days of folk music. Their fateful encounter took place in the early 1960s, when Greenwich Village was the heart of a cultural revolution. Young artists flooded the scene with guitars and grand dreams, singing about freedom, justice, war, and change. Among the voices rising in that revolution, Joan Baez stood out, her voice as pure as an angel's and her presence captivating all who heard her. Meanwhile, a young man from Minnesota wandered the streets of New York with his guitar, hoping someone would listen. Joan had heard Dylan's music before they ever met. Perhaps it was Song to Woody or Blowin' in the Wind. His lyrics were unlike anything she had heard before, not just songs, but prophesies. She immediately sensed that he was something rare. At the time, Joan was already a star, performing for massive crowds, while Dylan was still singing in tiny cafes to modest audiences. Yet there was something about him, his raw presence, his raspy voice, that drew her in. Joan wasn't just enamored with Bob's talent. She believed in him. At a major concert, she did something unforgettable. She called him up on stage. To Joan, it was a simple, generous gesture. But for Bob, it was life-changing. The audience didn't know him, and he didn't have the classic voice or looks. But when he began to sing, the room fell silent. His lyrics carried the weight of a generation's struggles. That night, Bob Dylan became more than an unknown name, thanks, in part, to Joan. From that moment, a powerful bond formed. When they sang With God on Our Side together, their harmonies, their glances, and even their silences revealed something deeper than words, an intense connection. No one could pinpoint the moment they fell in love, but anyone who saw them together could feel it. It was a love born of music, tender and fierce. Joan believed in Bob before the world even recognized his genius. She was his mentor, his companion, his lover, and Bob gave her a love that was both beautiful and painfully complex. Their relationship became one of the most unforgettable romances in music history. But Joan and Bob weren't just artists, they were symbols. They didn't perform for fame, they sang for change. As America erupted with protests and civil rights movements, their music became more than melody. It became a weapon for justice. They sang at marches, in churches, on the streets. With her stirring protest songs and his searing lyrics, they became the voices of the oppressed. One of the most powerful moments came in 1963 at the March on Washington. Over 250,000 people gathered before the Lincoln Memorial to hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic I Have a Dream speech. Among that sea of hope stood Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, two young artists witnessing a moment that would reshape history. But they weren't just there to watch. They stood on stage together and sang Blowin' in the Wind. Their voices soared through the crowd, transforming a song into a timeless anthem of peace and justice. It was proof that music could not only reflect history, it could help change it. In front of the Lincoln Memorial, as Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic I Have a Dream speech, one of the greatest in human history, Joan Baez and Bob Dylan stood quietly among the crowd, their hearts full of hope. They weren't just witnesses to history, they were part of it. Later that day, they walked up to the stage together and sang Blowin' in the Wind, a song that questioned justice, peace, and the inequality still present in society. Their performance resonated deeply, not just as part of a march, but as an anthem for an entire generation. It was said that in that moment, music proved its power to move history. Joan once declared, "We are not just folk singers. We are telling stories, fighting for what is right." Bob, too, had an uncanny ability to write lyrics that pierced the soul. But even amidst the noble ideals, the applause, and the emotionally charged performances, their love began to change, much like the movement they were a part of. Their relationship, like the society they were trying to transform, was not immune to turmoil. Bob, though a lyrical genius, was complex and untethered. He never wanted to be tied down, not by society and not by love. He was a free spirit, constantly chasing the next horizon. Joan, on the other hand, was emotional and rooted in the authenticity of her heart. She loved Bob with everything she had, but over time, she came to understand that love alone couldn't keep him close. As the tours grew more frequent and their shared nights fewer, Joan watched Bob drift into a world of introspection. He was searching for something even he couldn't name. She stayed by his side, feeling the emotional distance stretch. Bob wasn't one to express affection openly, but Joan could hear it in his songs. "He loves me in his own way," she once said, "but he loves freedom more." They continued to stand together at protests, raising their voices against injustice. But as Bob entered a new phase of his career, the growing gap between them became more than just musical. It was emotional. In the summer of 1965, Joan flew to England, hoping to continue performing with Bob just as they had in the past. But everything had changed. Instead of the warm reunion she had expected, she found herself on the outside. Bob, now surrounded by managers, producers, and rock musicians, was no longer the shy young man she once knew. His coldness spoke volumes. "I came to England hoping to sing with Bob," Joan recalled, "but he barely paid attention to me." She had helped him rise to fame, brought him into the spotlight, and now she was fading into the background of his story. What hurt Joan the most wasn't just being left behind. It was the indifference, the lack of goodbye. Bob said nothing. The distance between them simply widened, like a song ending without a final chord. Shortly after, Bob made a radical shift in his career. He put down his acoustic guitar and embraced electric rock. The moment came to a head at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, when he took the stage back by an electric band. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in outrage. Fans booed, feeling betrayed. Joan stood among them, silently watching. But for her, the loss was personal. She had not only lost the voice of folk music, she had lost a man she had once loved deeply. "I loved a man," she later said, "but that man had turned into someone I no longer recognized." Joan returned to the U.S. and continued her career. She still sang protest songs with conviction, but something had changed. The stages she once shared with Bob were now hers alone. In her melodies, there was still power, but also a touch of heartbreak, a whisper of regret. No one knew Bob like Joan did, and no one could feel the absence as deeply as she did. Bob had moved on, and Joan had to learn to do the same. Yet even in the years that followed, Joan couldn't fully let go. During her performances, she often sang Dylan's songs that once belonged to them both but now echoed only through her. Eventually, she poured her pain into one of her most hauntingly beautiful compositions, Diamonds and Rust, a musical letter to Bob Dylan and a poignant memory of their love story. By the 1970s, Joan Baez had moved past the most celebrated phase of her career, but the emotional wound from her past, especially those tied to Bob Dylan, remained quietly unhealed. One day, while living peacefully in her small home, she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Bob. His tone was still familiar, carrying that slight jest she once knew so well, but now it sounded distant, like an echo from a different lifetime. That brief call cut through the years like a blade, stirring up memories she thought she had buried. The days when they were in love, the promises they whispered, and the pain that had followed. As Joan later described it, "I picked up the phone and heard a voice I'd known a couple of light years ago." In that moment, she realized she had never truly let go of Bob. Despite all the time that had passed, despite the other relationships she'd experienced, a part of her heart remained trapped in the past, with that young man who had mysterious blue eyes and songs that could move a generation. That very night, Joan sat beside a guitar and began to write. Her lyrics spilled out in bittersweet clarity. "Now you're smiling out the window of that crummy hotel over Washington Square." Just one line, and she transported listeners back to the 1960s, when she and Bob lived in small, forgotten rooms, wrote music together, and dreamed of changing the world. That crummy hotel wasn't a literal place. It was symbolic of all the worn, intimate spaces they once shared, where laughter, music, and love filled the air before everything fell apart. Diamonds and Rust wasn't just a nostalgic song. It was a haunting acknowledgement of a love that couldn't last. Now you're telling me you're not nostalgic. Then give me another word for it, she challenged. Bob had always been emotionally guarded, refusing to look back or speak openly about the past. Joan, by contrast, remembered everything, and she refused to let their story be rewritten or ignored. Her lyrics demanded that Bob face the truth, even if he wouldn't name it. Then came the unforgettable line, "And if you're offering me diamonds and rust, I've already paid." Bob had once been the diamond, brilliant, dazzling, utterly captivating. But over time, he had become rust, distant, cold, and unreachable. Their love had been precious, but time had corroded it, leaving behind only memories and heartbreak. Joan later admitted that she hadn't initially intended to write a song about Bob, but once the words started flowing, it became clear. Diamonds and Rust was never about revenge. It was a confrontation, a confession, an honest reckoning with the love she gave, the sacrifices she made, and the man who ultimately walked away. When the song was released, fans quickly guessed its subject. Bob, in classic Dylan fashion, never admitted it. When asked, he gave only a faint smile and said, "I'm sure Joan is a very good songwriter. It's a great song." He remained the enigma, always keeping his thoughts locked away. But their story wasn't quite finished. In 1975, Bob unexpectedly reached out to Joan again. He invited her to join the Rolling Thunder Revue, a musical tour that promised a reunion of sorts. It had been years since they had spoken with any real depth. Joan didn't know why Bob was reaching out. Was it just for the music? Or was he trying to reconnect with a piece of their shared past? She didn't have answers, but she knew one thing for certain. If she declined, she would always wonder what might have happened if she had said yes. So, she accepted. The moment Joan stepped backstage on the tour, she realized how much had changed. Bob was no longer the man she once loved. The atmosphere was chaotic and theatrical, a far cry from the simple stages of the folk movement they had once shared. He now wore flamboyant costumes and was surrounded by a new crowd, artists, performers, and friends she didn't recognize. Joan immediately felt out of place in this transformed world. Their first reunion wasn't marked by warm embraces or emotional conversations. It was a meeting of old friends who now felt like strangers. Still, despite the distance, the past lingered just beneath the surface, waiting for the music to bring it back. Their reunion wasn't filled with warm embraces or nostalgic conversations. They spoke like old friends, but also like strangers. Joan could sense it wasn't the same Bob Dylan she had once known. There was a distance between them, a chasm she couldn't quite bridge. Yet, the moment they stepped on stage together, all that distance seemed to dissolve. Standing side by side, harmonizing on the very songs that had once made them legends, the connection from the past resurfaced. When Joan sang beside Bob, time seemed to stop. They performed blowing in the wind. Their eyes met, smiles flickered, and when Bob added a spontaneous line that made Joan laugh, it was like the years had melted away. For a moment, on that stage, there was still Joan and Bob, two souls, two voices, blending perfectly. On stage, Joan recalled, "We were still us. That was the only thing I was certain of at that moment." But once the spotlight dimmed, reality crept back in. Backstage, Bob asked her why she had agreed to join the tour. Joan simply said she wanted to sing with him one more time. Yet both of them knew the truth. Everything between them had changed. The tour went on. They continued to sing together, still creating magical moments for the audience. But deep inside, each song felt like a slow goodbye. "I thought I had let go of Bob," Joan reflected, "but then I realized parts of him were still stuck inside me." When the Rolling Thunder Revue came to an end, Joan knew this would likely be the last time they'd share such closeness. Bob returned to his world, and Joan to hers. Although they crossed paths occasionally in the years that followed, their relationship never returned to what it had once been. Many years later, Joan spoke of Bob with honesty and grace. "Bob was a big part of my life, and I think I was a big part of his. But we were never meant to be together forever. It was just a beautiful chapter, but it's closed now." Looking back, the love between Joan Baez and Bob Dylan didn't end in a fairy tale. But perhaps that's not what mattered most. What they shared left behind something far more enduring: melodies, memories, and moments that would never fade. Some relationships aren't meant to last forever, but some love stories live on, in lyrics, in harmonies, in the music that echoes long after the last chord is played. Now, when Joan looks back, she does so with a smile. She once said that Bob Dylan was the greatest love of her life. Not every love story has a happy ending, but some become immortal through song. What do you think of their relationship? Was it a beautiful but unfinished love story, or simply two artists who found each other for a fleeting moment and then drifted apart? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit like and share so more people can discover this fascinating story. For more tales of legendary artists and the music that shaped generations, click on the videos on your screen now. And finally, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upcoming video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.